There's been discussion of these 51 intelligence agents or officers that signed this letter at the behest of Antony Blinken to cover up the Hunter Biden laptop. They're saying, let's not put the American people through 51 investigations. Let's just revoke their security clearance. That affects their employment, and they can't do any further damage. What are your thoughts on those 51 that knowingly misled the American people? Should they have their security clearance removed?
Oh, I absolutely would pull their clearance. That's the least that you can do. And then I would put together a prosecution and go after them because they betrayed the trust of the American people. This is the big problem. When you take an oath in the Department of Defense or in the military, you swear to uphold the United States Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to obey the orders of the officers appointed over you. Well, there's a conflict there. On the one hand, you're supposed to obey the officers appointed over you, and you're supposed to simultaneously be true to the Constitution. What happens if obeying the officers violates your loyalty and oath to the Constitution? We've got to resolve this because this is not unique to the CIA. This is a problem that runs across the entire federal government. But I think the CIA is one of these organizations that deserves a lot more attention than it gets. There's practically no oversight. The budget is a very vague thing. We can't really audit it effectively. It's even worse in some respects than the Department of Defense. It's a black hole. It's been a rogue organization for many, many years. I don't know who is behind all 51 of those officers, but obviously they signed that assuming two things. First of all, I'm violating my oath by aligning myself politically with something as opposed to simply doing my job as an intelligence analyst. And then secondly, I'm probably doing what the people above me want me to do. Now, undoubtedly, much like you see in the Department of Defense, the people that want to be generals and admirals, they unquestioningly obey everything. And if you want them to be diversity conscious, equity conscious, you name it, they're, oh, yes, please pick me. I'll enforce all those dumb policies. Oh, yes, I'll promote everybody regardless of any demonstrated character or competence. They could be idiots, and I'll vote for them if you tell me that's what I need to do. This is a big problem, Stephen. And you got to clean house in Washington. You got to get rid of a lot of people and start over. Do you really think that anybody who will be elected in November or comes to power in November, one way or the other, do you think any of them can do
that? I'm very, very pessimistic. Like Vemaswamy is the one who talks about it the most, but I don't know that he'll have a cabinet position. And even if he did, will he actually have the authority and the power to get it done? I just think, you know, the swamp is going to do everything it can to protect the swamp. We've seen that all of these cover-ups against Trump, and it's all about, in the end, it all boils down to protecting the money and the interest of the Washington, D.C. elites. Well, you know, it's also a rarity that a president actually picks the vice presidential candidate he wants to run with him. Normally that's done by donors, you know, people with powerful bank accounts and interests. How did Henry Kissinger become the national security advisor for Richard Nixon? Because of a man named Nelson Rockefeller, who had contributed millions to Nixon's campaign in 1968. And so he said, I'll support you, Dick, I'll do whatever you like, but you have to take Henry Kissinger as your national security advisor. So he took him. I mean, this is not a new phenomenon. This sort of thing has been the case, and I'm sure right now donors will pick cabinet members, you know, that align with their agendas, whatever those agendas are. And there are all sorts of agendas in Washington. You just look at the Green New Deal, a disaster that, you know, on steroids for everybody. But there are people that are absolutely unwavering in their demand for that. I'm sure that their supporters will get critical positions in a future administration. It's just the nature of the way we run the show. But the problem now is, I don't think we've ever seen quite as much money as we do today in politics. It's just a tidal wave, and it's very difficult for anyone running for office to ignore the tidal wave. Yeah, I was shocked recently to learn that Mike Pence became Trump's vice president at the insistence of Chris Christie. I didn't realize that he had a hand, and you know, Chris Christie just loves Donald Trump. Well, Jeb Bush I'm told was the one who went to Pence long before the convention and said, "You are going to be the vice president regardless of whomever we nominate." So I think Pence was backed by the Bushies, probably some other critical players with lots of money. And grudgingly, I think Donald Trump said, all right. I mean, one of the things that President Trump said from time to time in the first 2.5 to 3 years of his administration were, "I'm the decider, no one else." So frankly, whoever else may be in this administration doesn't matter. I'm the one who makes the decisions. I think he got an education that's not true. Presidents really don't have as much flexibility and freedom of maneuver as they think. And once they get in there, they're dealing with these realities. Biden is the exception because he's not even, I don't think he's even conscious of what's going on. But it's the same principle at work. So people that think that someone is going to emerge as a result of the ballot box and save us, in other words, we have to elect candidate X, he is going to save us, they're delusional. I keep telling people, if you want to be saved, you're going to have to save yourself. People look at you with this dumb look, Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the U.S. border crisis. The Democrats are playing a pretty crafty game right now where we know that they've done nothing to protect the border. They've set the Republicans up with this bill that wasn't very good. And now Biden's, his hand has been forced to do this executive order to secure the border. And yet the same amount of people are coming in. Most countries, they're saying, well, just let them in like nothing changed. And yet I think Democrats believe, oh my gosh, this guy stepped up and he saved the border. Is this whole thing to give him talking points before the first debate? Who knows? I don't know. I'll be surprised if there is any debate. I don't think Biden's going to be the nominee. I think on the 19th of August, they'll announce somebody else is stepping in. Here's the bottom line. Right now, the official numbers suggest that we have at least 52 million people living inside our borders who were not born here. Now, the number is probably higher, to be frank. All the numbers are turning out to be much higher than everybody thinks. Somebody said by the time Biden goes away, there will have been over 30 million new illegals added to the pile. It may be higher than that. The question that Americans should ask is, why? What's behind this? Why is this happening? Why hasn't the Senate or the House intervened to stop it and override the president? Because there's an expectation that even on its worst day, the American Congress will still think about the American people. Well, they've turned out to be wrong. So what you have right now is a very carefully orchestrated, well-organized invasion, and Michael Yon has done some great work on this. There are others, Ann Vandersteel, they've gone, started in Darien and walked this sort of path to enter the United States illegally in Texas. But you also have large numbers of people from other countries, China and elsewhere, coming in on aircraft into Mexico City and then joining the throng. And then, by the way, we have a lot of people coming in illegally who walk over the northern border or come on false pretenses, in other words, a phony visa. Some of them are flying in. I mean, we really don't know how many millions there are, but the objective is that each of those illegals is given, especially if you come through the Texas border, the last 4 digits of supposedly a social security number, and they're told this is what you need to do in November. You present these 4 numbers as evidence for your citizenship, and you insist you are a citizen. Because there's a new clause in the federal law that says if someone shows up and is absolutely convinced that they are citizens, then they may vote. Now, why is this? Because these people are supposed to vote the current people who are governing our country into power permanently. That's all. In other words, this is a Bolshevik-style revolution without the violence, although the violence is picking up because obviously a lot of these illegals constitute a crime wave of their own, and we're having trouble dealing with it because we've constrained the police. And, we have judges that have been appointed over the years that seem to be as anxious to destroy the United States as perhaps anyone in history. And how do you do that? Well, you make the law toothless, you reward the criminal, and you punish the enforcer. So, policemen today are very reluctant to do things because they're afraid they'll end up going to jail instead of the individual that committed the crime. And of course, the whole George Floyd thing, you go all the way back to that and his criminal record and his past. And then the autopsy that said the man was not killed or murdered by that policeman at all. And that policeman didn't do anything that was not practiced all over the country by police departments. It didn't make any difference, did it? He was sentenced, to life or some outrageous, time. That's a big signal that tells every policeman in the United States, when in doubt, do nothing. So we have this tidal wave of criminality that's sweeping across the country. The people that are in the Border Patrol are distraught. They can't do their jobs right now. They're no different from the non-governmental organizations up and down the trail from Darien all the way to Mexico. Because the non-governmental organizations are being subsidized even by the federal government as well as other sources to help promote this invasion. All of it is designed to denationalize the United States. If you can swamp us with enough people who are fundamentally different from us, culturally, linguistically, ethnically, go down the list. As long as they're radically different from Americans, the average American, they can contribute to the dilution of the American identity. The dilution of the American population to the point where suddenly we are a minority within our own country, and we have little or no authority over our government, because the government is now kept in power by these people who were systematically encouraged to invade our country. That's about the best that I can say right now. And there's nobody in Washington that wants to come to terms with this. I shouldn't say nobody. There are a few good men and women, but the majority, no, they're not interested. And as far as they're concerned, they'll get lots of contributions from multiple sources. You keep talking about the military-industrial complex, I could talk about, the energy complex. There are any number of different businesses that are happy to break the law and bring in cheap labor. And we know from recent labor statistics that most of the jobs are going today not to American citizens, but to illegals. Well, the argument is, well, the illegals will work for less. Okay, then how do we fix that? We pass a law that it's illegal to hire a non-citizen if there is a citizen present who can do the job. That's true in Austria, by the way. The Austrians have very good laws on this. No one can immigrate into Austria unless there is a demonstrated need for that person. And that only can happen when all of the Austrians who can work are employed. I mean, why don't we do that? Well, we're not doing that because it doesn't pay well for people on the Hill, and it doesn't make money for all sorts of nefarious characters that I just collectively call them billionaire oligarchs. In the meantime, lost in all this, once again, is the American citizen. Yeah, we sure end up getting the short end of the stick in our own country. That's an understatement. Yeah, I'd say it's a very long, pointy stick. Yeah, and it's being shoved in the wrong places for the wrong reasons. Yeah, gosh dang. Well, I read a lot of European news just like I'm sure you do, and I'm watching them be invaded. And it's like, watching a wreck in slow motion, and I'm like across the ocean going, you guys do not see what's happening. But again, I think the government leaders know it. They just don't do anything about it. Same thing back here at home. I think the American people and DC government have a very different vision of what the country is and where it's going. And sadly, we're all kind of strapped to this train to crap. Well, lots of people live in denial, Stephen, you know that. And if you are not near the border, you can pretend it's really a border problem. In reality, it's everywhere, but people don't care to admit that. Then there's something else. People aren't motivated until they are touched in some dramatic way. When do people rebel against governments? Well, usually it has something to do with not being able to eat. I mean, if you can keep everyone fed, make sure that everyone can drive their car to the 7-Eleven, pick up a six-pack, go home and watch the game on Monday night, then I guess you're probably all right. In other words, we have a lot of sedated consumers in the United States. The sedation has to end. If it doesn't, then we are the proverbial boiling frog that is boiled. Yeah, well, hopefully you and I can continue to raise awareness of this and try and wake people up, get them out of the frying pan. I know, you're constrained for time. This has been a very interesting conversation. I appreciate you coming on, appreciate your service to the country. I'm going to put a link to our country, our choice, down below so that people can learn more about that. Colonel Macgregor, thank you for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Stephen.